On March 9th, 2009, a school teacher named Margaret did something that everyone around her thought was reckless. The S&P 500 had just closed at 676 points. Lehman Brothers had collapsed 6 months earlier. Retirement accounts across the country had been cut nearly in half. The headlines were using words like catastrophe and collapse with the kind of frequency that makes ordinary people feel like the ground itself is dissolving beneath them. Margaret took $50,000 she had been saving for a house down payment and put it into a simple S&P 500 index fund. Her friends thought she had lost her mind. Her family begged her to wait until things stabilized. She ignored all of them. That $50,000 is worth approximately $590,000 today. She didn't pick individual stocks. She didn't have access to information nobody else had. She simply recognized that fear had created a moment, a specific, unrepeatable compression of opportunity, and she acted while everyone else was frozen. My name is Anderson, and I want to tell you about a different kind of moment. Not a market crash, something potentially larger. A transfer of $124 trillion that is already underway, that will unfold over the next 2 decades, and that will create more new millionaires than any single event in American financial history. Most people have no idea it's happening. The ones who do are quietly positioning themselves. Today, I want to show you exactly what this is, why the parallels to 2009 are more precise than most people realize, and what ordinary people are doing right now to make sure they are on the right side of it. The one number that changes everything: $124 trillion. That is the figure Cerulli Associates, one of the most respected research firms in financial services, has placed on the wealth transfer currently unfolding across the United States between now and 2048. It is the largest movement of private capital in recorded human history. Nothing that has ever happened in the global economy comes close to it in scale. To make that number feel real, rather than simply large, consider this. $124 trillion exceeds the combined annual economic output of every country on Earth. It is more than 5 times the current national debt of the United States. It is wealth that was accumulated over 8 decades of American economic expansion, through the post-war boom, through the technology revolution, through the longest bull market in history, and it is now preparing to move, not all at once, over 25 years, but moving continuously in ways that will reshape asset prices, investment flows, business opportunities, and the financial trajectories of millions of ordinary households. The mechanism is straightforward, even if the implications are not. Baby boomers, Americans born between 1946 and 1964, currently control approximately 52% of all wealth in the United States. That is roughly $78 trillion concentrated in a single generation. The youngest boomers turn 62 this year. The oldest are approaching 80. Over the next 2 decades, through inheritance, estate transfers, and charitable giving, that wealth cascades to the generations below them. Generation X stands to receive approximately $39 trillion. Millennials will receive approximately $46 trillion. Even Generation Z will begin seeing significant inheritances as the transfer accelerates through the 2030s and 2040s. The movement is already underway. It has been quietly accelerating for several years. And, like the market bottom of 2009, it is receiving almost none of the attention it deserves relative to what it will mean for the people positioned to benefit from it. Now, why this moment rhymes with 2009? The parallel to March 2009 runs deeper than a surface comparison between a market crash and a wealth transfer. What made 2009 transformative for people like Margaret wasn't just the low prices. It was the convergence of 3 specific conditions that rarely align simultaneously. Assets were dramatically undervalued after the S&P 500 had fallen 57% from its peak. A massive injection of capital was coming through government stimulus, through quantitative easing, through the slow return of institutional money to the sidelines. And the majority of ordinary investors were either too frightened or too financially depleted to act. The people who became wealthy in the decade that followed weren't the ones with the best stock picks. They were the ones who remained present when everyone else left the room. The current moment shares those structural features, though the source of capital is entirely different. Assets are not crushed, but the transfer of wealth will create both surges of buying activity and periodic dislocations as estates are settled, portfolios are liquidated, and trillions of dollars are redeployed by heirs whose investment preferences differ significantly from the generation that accumulated it. The capital injection this time is not coming from a government printing press. It is coming from the wealthiest generation in American history, passing assets accumulated over a lifetime to their children and grandchildren. The scale of that injection, $124 trillion, dwarfs every government stimulus program ever attempted. The entire pandemic relief effort totaled approximately $5 trillion. The wealth transfer represents 25 times that amount, flowing through the economy over 2 decades rather than 2 years. And just like 2009, most people don't know it's happening at the scale it's actually happening. The daily noise of market movements, interest rate decisions, and political headlines consumes the attention that this longer, slower, more consequential story deserves. Where the money is actually going. Here is the detail that most coverage of the great wealth transfer gets wrong, and it matters enormously for how you think about your own position within it. The inheritance itself is not where most new millionaires will come from. Cerulli's research shows that approximately 62% of the wealth being transferred will flow from high net worth and ultra high net worth households, which represent only about 2% of all American families. The transfer is highly concentrated. A relatively small number of families will receive life-changing inheritances. The vast majority of households will receive more modest sums or nothing at all. The opportunity is not primarily the inheritance. It is what the movement of $124 trillion does to the economy around you, to asset prices, to business activity, to employment in sectors that manage and deploy capital, to real estate markets in specific geographies, to entire industries that exist to facilitate the movement of wealth between generations. When trillions flow into investment accounts, broad market valuations are supported, benefiting everyone already invested. When heirs purchase homes, real estate values in desirable markets are pushed upward, benefiting existing owners. When inherited capital funds new ventures, economic activity accelerates in ways that create employment and opportunity broadly. The wealth transfer creates rising tides across multiple asset classes simultaneously. The question is not whether you will receive a significant inheritance. The question is whether you are positioned, through investment and through skill, to participate in the economic environment that $124 trillion in motion creates. The generational shift that redirects trillions. There is a second force operating within the wealth transfer that most people overlook entirely, and it is one of the most significant investment dynamics of the next 2 decades. Baby boomers built their wealth through a specific set of investment preferences: blue chip equities, investment grade bonds, real estate in suburban markets, dividend paying stocks. Their heirs, the Millennials and Gen Z recipients of the $46 trillion heading their way, have dramatically different preferences. Research from Bank of America and Merrill Lynch shows that 72% of investors between the ages of 21 and 43 believe it is no longer possible to achieve above average returns solely through traditional stocks and bonds. This is not a marginal shift in sentiment. It is a generational reorientation of investment philosophy that will redirect trillions of dollars away from the asset classes boomers preferred and toward the ones their heirs favor. The sectors positioned to capture disproportionate flows from that reorientation are already visible. Artificial intelligence infrastructure is absorbing enormous capital in 2026 with the build-out of data centers, semiconductor supply chains, and the software layers running on top of them. Clean energy transition investments are scaling globally in ways that create investable opportunities across multiple asset classes. Healthcare innovation, particularly at the intersection of biology and computing, is entering a period of accelerated development that will require sustained capital for decades. Digital assets, despite their volatility, are increasingly being held by younger investors as a core portfolio component rather than a speculative position. This does not mean abandoning the broad market. It means understanding that the capital flows driving the next 20 years of wealth creation will not look identical to the flows that drove the last 20. The sectors that attracted boomer capital may not produce the same relative returns as the sectors attracting the capital of their heirs. If this is shifting how you think about what is actually happening in the economy around you right now, take 2 seconds and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this reach the people who need it, the math that makes this personal. Let me bring this down from the scale of trillions to the scale of a single household, because the numbers at that level are where this becomes a real conversation rather than an abstract one. Consider someone who is 35 years old today. They are not expecting a significant inheritance. They are not in a high-paying profession. They invest $500 per month in a broadly diversified index fund for the next 25 years, roughly the duration of the Great Wealth Transfer. At the historical average annual return of 10%, those contributions, totaling $150,000, grow to approximately $665,000. At a more conservative 7%, the outcome is approximately $405,000. Now, factor in what $124 trillion in motion does to long-term economic growth rates, even modestly. If that capital deployment pushes average annual returns 1 percentage point above historical norms over the transfer period, the 7% scenario becomes 8%. The 405,000 becomes approximately 475,000. Increase the monthly contribution to $1,000 achievable for many households as careers progress and income grows, and the 10% scenario produces $1.3 million. Regular people reach millionaire status not through dramatic windfalls, but through consistent participation in an economy supercharged by unprecedented capital flows. The school teacher who invested $50,000 in 2009 didn't need genius or insider access. She needed capital, discipline, and time. The same 3 ingredients apply now. The transfer simply adds tailwinds to a strategy that was already proven before any of this began. Now, what to do with this information? The action framework that positions an ordinary household to benefit from this moment is not complicated, but it requires starting now, rather than waiting for the perfect conditions that never arrive. This month, examine your tax-advantaged account contributions. For 2026, the 401k contribution limit is $23,500, with an additional $7,500 available for anyone 50 or older. The IRA limit is $7,000. These accounts allow wealth to compound without annual tax drag, and in an environment where capital is flowing at historic scale, the compounding effect of tax-free growth over 2 decades is not a minor technical detail. It is the difference between a comfortable retirement and a constrained one. If you are not maximizing these contributions, that is the first and most consequential adjustment you can make. This year, audit where your investment exposure actually sits. Broad market index funds capture aggregate growth without requiring you to predict which specific sectors will benefit most from the transfer. As capital flows into various corners of the economy, owning the entire market ensures participation in that growth without the risk of concentrated bets on individual sectors. Low-cost index funds remain the most reliable vehicle for ordinary investors to participate in economic expansion at scale. Over the next several years, consider whether your career skills position you to benefit from the industries that facilitate wealth movement. Financial planning, estate administration, tax advisory, wealth management, real estate, and legal services will all expand significantly as trillions change hands. People who develop meaningful expertise in these areas will find sustained demand for their skills across the entire duration of the transfer. The wealth movement doesn't only benefit heirs. It benefits everyone involved in the management, protection, and deployment of capital in motion. Finally, build and maintain a cash reserve specifically designated for opportunistic deployment. The transfer will create periodic dislocations, moments when assets temporarily misprice as estates are liquidated, portfolios are rebalanced, and markets absorb large capital movements. Having cash available when others are forced to sell has historically produced the kind of enhanced returns that compound meaningfully over decades. This is not market timing, it is preparedness. The same preparedness that allowed Margaret to act in March 2009 when everyone else was paralyzed. Before I go, let me leave you with this. I want to come back to Margaret one more time, not because her story is exceptional, but because of how ordinary it actually was. She did not have access to information nobody else had. The market bottom of 2009 was visible to everyone with a brokerage account. The headlines were public, the prices were public, the fear was everywhere. The opportunity was equally visible to anyone willing to look at the math rather than the mood of the moment. What Margaret had was clarity. She understood that fear and value are not the same thing. That the conditions around her were telling a story about emotion, not about the long-term trajectory of the American economy, and she acted on that understanding while the people around her acted on the fear. The great wealth transfer is the same kind of moment, at a different scale and through a different mechanism. $124 trillion is not a secret. The research is public. The timeline is documented. The sectors and geographies that will benefit are identifiable by anyone willing to spend an afternoon reading rather than scrolling. The question, as it was in 2009, is not whether the opportunity exists. It is whether you are willing to act on information that is sitting in plain sight, while most people are distracted by whatever crisis dominates the headlines this week. The people who become wealthy over the next 25 years will not, in most cases, have done anything more sophisticated than staying invested, contributing consistently, and understanding the environment they were operating in. They will look back on this period the way the investors of 2009 look back on that year, not as a moment they predicted perfectly, but as a moment they did not run from. The transfer is already underway. The only question left is whether you are in position to move with it. I'm Anderson. I'll see you in the next one. And if you're actually getting something from these videos, consider subscribing. I put one out every week and I try to make every single one worth your time.